Most people don't fail because they stop. They fail because of the story they tell themselves the moment they stop. You miss a day, then a week, and suddenly that gap feels like a verdict. You tell yourself, I ruined it. I'm just not consistent. But one of the most misunderstood things about consistency is that people assume it means never missing. But more often, consistency is simply the ability to return without shame. Hello and welcome to Uplifted Living, the podcast for living uplifted. I'm Nick Gilbert, and I'm really glad you're here. This is a space for thoughtful conversations about growth, clarity, and living with intention, without the pressure to force change or perform progress. Let's begin. We live in a culture that worships the streak. We track it. We gamify it. We judge our worth by it. But there's a hidden danger in the streak, because when the goal is don't break the chain, the moment the chain breaks, which it always will because you are human, the entire structure collapses. Today, we're going to dismantle the all or nothing trap. We're going to look at why your brain resists restarting. And we're going to replace the pressure of performance with the safety of identity. This isn't about how to force yourself to do more. It's about how to stop abandoning yourself when you do less. You've probably lived this cycle. January 1st feels perfect. January 17th hits. You have a busy week, a sick child, low energy, or just life. And instead of adjusting, you stop completely. Not because you don't care, but because the moment feels contaminated. You think, well, I already messed up this week. I might as well wait for Monday. This is the streak trap. It's a signal. Not a signal that you were lazy. It's a signal that your definition of consistency is too fragile for life. When we treat a pause like a failure, we create shame. And shame is the enemy of growth. Shame makes you hide. It makes you avoid the very thing that would help you. You stop the habit, not because you can't do it, but because the feeling of returning to it reminds you that you stopped. We tell ourselves, I always do this. That story lasts far longer than the break ever did. It turns a 3-day pause into a 3-month quit. Let's interrupt that pattern with something mundane. Think about brushing your teeth. If you were so exhausted one night that you fall asleep without brushing, what happens the next morning? Do you wake up and say, well, I guess I'm just not a toothbrusher anymore? Do you wait until next Monday to start brushing again? Of course not. You just brush your teeth. No drama, no identity crisis, no shame spiral. Why? Because you already identify as a person who brushes their teeth. The behavior is just something you do to support that identity. A missed instance doesn't threaten who you are. But when it comes to growth, habits, meditation, writing, exercise, we treat a pause like a character flaw. That's not discipline. That's perfectionism disguised as standards. Here's the shift that changes everything. Consistency is not a performance standard. It is an identity practice. The most consistent people aren't the ones who never stop. They're the ones who don't let stopping define them. So if you're feeling burned out on trying to keep the streak alive, the solution isn't to push harder. It's to reset gently. We need a kinder, more sustainable definition. Consistency is the ability to return without shame. Return after a missed day. Return after a hard week. Return after a season where things didn't go as planned. Every time you return, you are voting for your identity. You are saying, I am someone who comes back, and that identity is resilient. It survives interruptions. It adapts to seasons. It doesn't collapse under pressure. Instead of asking, how do I keep the streak perfect? Try asking, what would support me in returning right now? Maybe it's not a full hour workout. Maybe it's 5 minutes. Maybe it's not a perfect chapter. Maybe it's one sentence. Treat your habits like a GPS. When you miss a turn, there's no judgment. There's just recalculating. That is what margin looks like. That is what compassion looks like. Here's a simple but powerful change you can make today. Stop tracking how long you stay consistent. Start tracking how quickly you return. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just honestly. Miss a day? Return the next. Miss a week? Return when you notice. No punishment. No, I'll start over on Monday. Just return. That single shift builds more long-term consistency than any streak ever will. You don't become consistent by never falling off. You become consistent by learning how to return calmly, honestly, and without the shame. Once you stop turning pauses into verdicts, growth becomes a lot less fragile. If this connected with you, next week we are going to talk about learning to trust your pace, because rushing is usually why we break in the first place. Remember, burnout isn't a failure. It's a signal, and returning is the practice. If this episode resonated with you, consider following or subscribing to the show and sharing it with someone who needs a gentler definition of consistency. Also, be sure to follow the Instagram page at Uplifted Living Podcast. I'll leave the link in the description. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and continue to uplift both yourself and those around you. Thank you for listening.